question. So you're saying that the eye actually scans from left to right, and that's why we have formatted our books to scan from left to right. What about the old Chinese symbols where they were using predominantly a left hand, and was that because they were writing pictograms as opposed to letters? Is that a
Probably.
different way of processing?
Yeah,
And they are
there's a
scrolls
cultural,
unfolded. They're scrolls unfolded
yeah,
from
there's a
right to
cultural watershed
left.
that
Yeah.
starts with the Greeks in terms of reading from left to right. The Greeks were the first to invent that, and the early Greeks were still reading from right to left, like all the other societies to the east of Greece. And then they experimented with a style called boustrophodon, where it's named after a bull plowing a field. It goes up one way and then goes back the other, so that you would read from left. One line would be right to left, the
Ah,
next line
right.
left to right,
Mhm.
back and forth that way until they finally evolved into left to right, and that's the style that we've inherited. But it is significant because the movement from left to right, the significant thing about it is that it's moving in the direction of the right hand, and the right is the direction of increasing waking consciousness, the differentiated self and the ego and writing and all of that. Whereas if you look back in the earlier societies that have pictographic texts like the Chinese and the Egyptians and cuneiform, the writing is heavily pictographic, and it usually reads right to left. Now, the Egyptians also had, some of the hieroglyphs are read left to right, some are read right to left, some are read top to bottom, so they also had a number of directions. But it could very well be that if you're reading right to left, you're reading, in the direction of the left toward the other way. So really,
That's
there's,
interesting.
the right hand is, it's associated with the masculine dominant, and the left hand is associated with the feminine. And the left-hand way, like, in India, you have the tantric cults that are followers of the left-hand path. And the left is always associated with the female and the dark and the sinister. I think the word in French for left is sinister, sinistre, I believe. And you also find the left tied in with the older mother goddess world of the nighttime and the moon and lunar calendars. Most calendars up until the Egyptian calendar were lunar-based calendars, and they emphasize a lunar calendar essentially emphasizes the nighttime sky. So it's still a
So you can
society
see the
that is
moon.
kind of encompassed by the mother womb. The solar calendars emphasize the daytime sky, and the Egyptians were the first to invent a solar calendar, and we inherited that from Julius Caesar, who got it from being over there with Cleopatra and so forth. But
Fascinating.
it makes a big difference because the left and the goddess and the night, they're all intertwined. And in the West there's been this gradual awakening from the goddess and from the left-hand path and from the nighttime, and you can trace it. You can even trace it in ancient Egypt in their movement from the first three dynasties of ancient Egypt are lunar dominant dynasties, and then by the time you get to the fourth dynasty, which is the famous one with the Great Pyramids, everything is shifting to the sun. And Re, the sun god, becomes the primary deity, rather than Osiris, who in the earlier dynasties had been the primary deity. And you get these magnificent pyramids that are built, and the temple, the mortuary temple on the pyramid, at that time in the fourth dynasty, shifts to the eastern face of the pyramid, facing the rising sun, which is one of the best arguments for refuting, the arguments of Graham Hancock and Boval and those people that the Sphinx actually goes back to 10,000 BC, because the Sphinx is facing east, and they forget that. And it became the fashion in the fourth dynasty to orient the mortuary temples toward the east, because this is the period when Egypt, the dark, chthonic, nighttime world of the ancient mother is, even in Egypt itself, they're awakening from it into the daylight. The consciousness is already there evolving, waking up and looking out into the daylight. And it's also at that time, shortly thereafter in the fifth dynasty, that they start writing down, the pyramid texts and reconfiguring the whole society. Writing becomes more and more important in Egypt too. So you can trace this evolution of consciousness in the West. We have really departed from the left-hand path and the lunar calendar and the nighttime way, and all of that's bound up with the realm of the goddess. It's been a gradual thing.
Oh, this is fascinating. Two questions, and one of them, let me ask both of them. One of them is, so that's the advent of the solar god that you talk about, the sun god, the day, the masculine.
Right.
And let's differentiate that, and then eventually I want to go back to Sumeria and more of the patriarchal takeover mythologically. And then you've got that great story of the feminine now taking on a very horrible cast, scary monster feminine. You have to demonize something in order to then conquer it and then subdue it. My other question has to do with an observation here, how fascinating it is that our very hard wiring can be pulled around by the advent of technological innovations such as writing, that it really changes the way that we function, that the two are so interrelated, that if you have a technological revolution like writing and more left brain usage, that is laying the path for the patriarchal, that somehow that ties in. It just doesn't come out of nowhere.
Alphabetic writing, more so than pictographic. And the alphabet is you can trace the background of every single one of the letters. You can find that it was originally a pictogram that's been changed. Like the letter A, for example, you may know this is
The bull.
it's an upside down bull's head, but the horns, the 2 feet are the 2 horns of a bull. And that was originally Aleph, and then Alpha means ox, I think, in Aleph means ox in Hebrew, I believe. And then they changed it. All those letters are originally, most of them are actually originally Egyptian hieroglyphs that the Hebrews inherited from the Egyptians and turned around or changed the direction of the writing and made them purely abstract. That is to say, non-visual, non-representational as far as concrete visual goes, but they became abstractly visual.
John, I'm out of time, but there is so much, much more that I know you have to say on this key issue, this key dilemma that is so fundamental a part of our human story that I think that we've lost sight of it. And I do want to invite you back to tell us the whole story, so I look forward to that. In the meantime, let me recommend John's 2 books. We've been talking today about his book, Celluloid Heroes and Mechanical Dragons, film as the Mythology of Electronic Society, and John's earlier book, another and very important read to understand where we are in society today in the big, big, big picture, Twilight of the Clockwork God, Conversations on Science and Spirituality at the End of an Age. That was John Ebert. I'm Laura Lee. Thanks for listening.